17 Worst Drug Addictions in Black Music History. Did you know that a medical examiner once mistook a 34-year-old music icon for a man of 60? Welcome back to Remembered Lives channel, where we pull back the velvet curtains of nostalgia to confront the haunting truths of music history. We spent our youth dancing to their melodies, but behind the golden records and blinding spotlights lay an agonizing price. Today, we uncover 17 legendary Black artists whose unmatched genius was tragically swallowed by the dark abyss of severe drug addiction. These weren't just headlines, they were the heartbreaking soundtracks of our lives, burning brilliantly before dissolving into dust. Before we begin this emotional journey down memory lane, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below sharing which artist's voice deeply touched your soul during your youth. Whitney Houston. They called her The Voice, a title not given by marketing executives, but earned through a once-in-a-generation vocal instrument that felt almost divine. For our generation, Whitney Houston wasn't just a pop star. She was the soundtrack to our youth, our weddings, and our quietest nights. When her self-titled debut dropped in 1985, followed by Whitney in 1987, she became the first artist ever to achieve 7 consecutive #1 hits on the Billboard Hot 100. By the time the Bodyguard soundtrack shattered global records in 1992, selling over 45 million copies worldwide, Whitney had ascended to a cultural peak that few humans ever witness. But the higher the pedestal, the more brutal the fracture. Behind the pristine, glamorous image curated by Arista Records lay a fragile soul suffocating under relentless pressure and a turbulent marriage. To numb the exhaustion of her historic 1999 My Love Is Your Love world tour, Whitney turned heavily to cocaine and marijuana. The decline was heart-wrenching to watch. By the early 2000s, that immaculate, multi-octave soprano voice began to rasp and fail. Rumors turned into terrifying reality during an infamous 2002 TV interview, exposing her skeletal frame and erratic behavior. Despite multiple stints in rehabilitation centers and a deeply anticipated comeback album in 2009, the damage to her cardiovascular system was irreversible. On February 11, 2012, at the Beverly Hilton Hotel, the music stopped. At just 44, Whitney was found submerged in a bathtub. The official coroner's report cited accidental drowning, but noted atherosclerotic heart disease and chronic cocaine use as pivotal factors. A tragic end to a queen who gave the world everything, yet kept nothing for herself. Miles Davis. If Whitney Houston was the emotion of Black music, Miles Dewey Davis III was its absolute, uncompromising intellect. He didn't just play jazz, he birthed its evolution, rewriting the rules of modern music across 5 distinct decades. From his cool jazz innovations to the modal mastery of Kind of Blue in 1959, which remains the best-selling jazz album of all time with over 5 million certified copies, Miles was the embodiment of artistic royalty. His trumpet didn't shout, it whispered secrets, cutting through smoky rooms with a haunting, muted tone that defined a generation's cool. Yet even the architect of modern jazz could not outrun the shadow of the needle. In the early 1950s, amidst a booming post-war jazz scene plagued by illicit substances, Miles succumbed to a severe heroin addiction. The brilliant visionary quickly spiraled into a ghost, missing high-profile gigs, borrowing money from desperate peers, and drifting into vagrancy. But Miles possessed a ferocious, stubborn pride. Realizing he was staring into an early grave, he retreated to his father's quiet farmhouse in 1954. In an agonizing display of sheer willpower, he went cold turkey, locking himself inside a guest room for days to endure brutal physical withdrawals without medical assistance. He emerged reborn. This harrowing victory allowed him to create his legendary second quintet and his groundbreaking 1970 jazz fusion masterpiece, Bitches Brew. Though he later battled cocaine abuse during a dark, reclusive period between 1975 and 1980, his initial triumph over heroin stands as a testament to his resilience. When he passed away from a stroke and pneumonia in 1991, he left behind a legacy that proved a genius could walk through fire and still change the world. Rick James. While others sought sophistication, James Ambrose Johnson Jr., known globally as Rick James, brought the raw, unadulterated energy of the streets straight into the mainstream. He was the undisputed king of punk funk, a wild, braided force of nature who single-handedly revitalized Motown Records in the late 1970s. His magnum opus, the 1981 album Street Songs, spent an astonishing 20 weeks at #1 on the R&B charts and spawned Super Freak, a bass line so infectious it later earned a Grammy for MC Hammer's sampling. Rick James was a musical mastermind, arranging, composing, and producing anthems that defined the neon-soaked dance floors of our adulthood. However, Rick's lifestyle was just as explosive as his bass lines. He didn't just experiment with drugs, he consumed them with an insatiable appetite, spending an estimated $7,000 a week on crack cocaine during the height of his fame. The chemical dependency completely dismantled his sanity. The boundary between rock star excess and criminal depravity vanished in 1991, when he was arrested for a horrific, drug-fueled assault on a young woman at his Hollywood home. Following a second similar incident while out on bail, he was convicted and served over 2 years in Folsom State Prison. The music industry that once worshipped his groove completely turned its back on him. Prison forced a temporary sobriety, but his body was already spent. After suffering a debilitating stroke in 1998, his health entered a terminal decline. On August 6, 2004, Rick James died in his Los Angeles apartment. While pulmonary failure was the direct cause, a cocktail of 9 different narcotics found in his bloodstream proved that the super freak could never truly outrun his darkest vice. Billie Holiday. To look back at the landscape of American jazz is to confront the haunting, unforgettable shadow of Eleonora Fagan, whom we deeply cherish as Billie Holiday. She did not possess a booming, operatic range, yet her voice held an intimacy that could break a heart from across a crowded room. When Lady Day sang, wearing her signature white gardenia, she reshaped the relationship between a vocalist and a microphone. Her seminal 1939 recording of Strange Fruit, a courageous, chilling protest against racial violence, was named the Song of the Century by Time magazine. Her phrasing was slow, deliberate, and soaked in a visceral melancholy that turned every lyric into a private confession. Yet the raw emotion that captivated our generation was forged in a crucible of childhood abandonment and early exploitation. To numb a reality that felt far too cruel to bear, Holiday sought refuge first in alcohol, and by the 1940s, in intravenous heroin use. The federal government, spearheaded by Harry Anslinger's relentless anti-drug campaign, targeted the vulnerable singer with terrifying cruelty. Her 1947 arrest resulted in a 10-month prison sentence, but the true devastation occurred upon her release. She was stripped of her New York City cabaret card. This bureaucratic execution effectively banned her from performing in any venue that served alcohol, the very lifeblood of the jazz community. Deprived of her primary livelihood, her physical health decayed rapidly, causing her pristine delivery to fracture into a weathered rasp. In July 1959, the tragic climax arrived. Bedridden with advanced cirrhosis and heart failure at Metropolitan Hospital, Holiday was placed under arrest by federal agents for narcotics possession while on her deathbed. Handcuffed to her mattress, broke and isolated, the Queen of Sorrow slipped away at just 44. Her story remains a painful monument to how society often punishes the very genius it exploits. Prince. Few figures in our lifetime redefined the boundaries of human creativity like Prince Rogers Nelson. He was an absolute enigma, a multi-instrumentalist virtuoso, a flamboyant showman, and a prolific composer who blurred the lines between rock, funk, R&B, and pop. His 1984 masterpiece, Purple Rain, didn't just top the charts, it became a global cultural phenomenon, selling over 25 million copies and earning an Academy Award. Prince was fiercely independent, famously writing, arranging, and performing nearly every instrument on his albums at his legendary Paisley Park studios. He gave us an anthem for every emotion, establishing a vault of unreleased music that remains unparalleled in modern history. But behind the high-heeled swagger, the glittering outfits, and the absolute mastery of the stage lay a silent, agonizing physical tax. Decades of executing breathtaking, acrobatic choreography and jumping off stage amplifiers, frequently while wearing towering high heels, had severely destroyed the cartilage in his hips. Refusing necessary hip replacement surgery due to his deeply held religious beliefs as a Jehovah's Witness regarding blood transfusions, Prince began secretly managing his excruciating chronic pain through heavy pharmaceutical intervention. What began as a desperate attempt to maintain his rigorous touring schedule morphed into a hidden dependency on synthetic opioids. The world remained completely oblivious to his suffering until April 21, 2016, when the music world stood frozen in disbelief. Prince was found unresponsive in an elevator at his Paisley Park estate. The official autopsy revealed a shocking truth. The musical giant had died from an accidental, self-administered overdose of fentanyl, a synthetic opioid 50 times more potent than heroin. It was a sobering reminder that even the most fiercely independent, otherworldly geniuses are ultimately bound by the fragile, painful limitations of the human frame. Charlie Parker. If jazz ever had a definitive comet, a force that burned with blinding brilliance only to dissolve into stardust in the blink of an eye, it was Charlie Bird Parker. He didn't just play the alto saxophone, he tore down the foundations of swing music and single-handedly constructed the complex, lightning-fast architecture of bebop. Alongside Dizzy Gillespie, Parker introduced a dizzying array of harmonic substitutions and frantic tempos that forced modern music to mature overnight. His iconic 1945 recordings, including Coco and Ornithology, are studied by music scholars today with the same reverence reserved for Bach or Beethoven. He turned the saxophone into an extension of the human nervous system. Tragically, Bird's revolutionary musical speed was matched by a devastating trajectory of self-destruction. His descent began prematurely at age 16, when a severe car accident left him with chronic spinal pain, leading to a fateful introduction to morphine. By his early 20s, Parker was hopelessly enslaved to a severe heroin addiction that dictated every aspect of his existence. The consequences were chaotic. He routinely missed recording sessions, pawned his beloved saxophones to street dealers, and occasionally resorted to busking on street corners for drug money. In 1946, following a chaotic session in Los Angeles, he suffered a severe mental breakdown and was institutionalized at Camarillo State Hospital for 6 grueling months. Though he achieved brief periods of clarity, producing sublime works like Charlie Parker with Strings, the psychological demons and physical damage were insurmountable. On March 12, 1955, while watching television in a friend's hotel suite, his heart simply stopped. Bird was only 34 years old. The attending forensic coroner, examining a body completely ravaged by advanced stomach ulcers and severe cirrhosis of the liver, mistakenly estimated Parker's age to be between 50 and 60. He flew too close to the sun, leaving behind a shattered legacy that changed the DNA of American music forever. Ike Turner. To speak of Isier Luster Turner Jr. is to trace the very architecture of rock and roll back to its muddy Mississippi roots. Long before he became a household name, Ike was a visionary producer, talent scout, and multi-instrumentalist. In 1951, he recorded Rocket 88 at Sun Studio, a track universally recognized by music historians as the very first rock and roll record ever pressed. When he formed the Ike and Tina Turner Revue, he engineered one of the most explosive, high-energy live acts of the 1960s and 70s, culminating in their blistering, Grammy-winning 1971 rendition of Proud Mary. Ike was a musical perfectionist, a man whose strict discipline built an empire of groove. However, the discipline that structured his art shattered completely when he was introduced to pharmaceutical-grade cocaine in the mid-1970s. What began as a tool to sustain grueling touring schedules quickly escalated into a multi-decade addiction to freebase and crack cocaine. The drug exacerbated an underlying volatile temperament, transforming a demanding bandleader into a paranoid, abusive tyrant. His chemical dependency fueled the systematic, horrific domestic terror inflicted upon his wife, Tina Turner, a dark reality that eventually dismantled their marriage and ruined his public standing. By the 1980s, Ike had squandered a fortune, estimated to have spent millions on his habit, leading to over 11 drug-related arrests and a 2-year prison sentence in 1989. Though he achieved a late career redemption, winning a Grammy in 2007 for his traditional blues album, Risin' with the Blues, the shadow of the pipe never truly left him. On December 12, 2007, Ike was found dead in his San Marcos home. The San Diego County Medical Examiner concluded that the 76-year-old pioneer had died from acute cocaine toxicity, a somber end to a man who helped build rock and roll, only to let his vices burn it to the ground. Frankie Lymon. For those of us who remember the crisp transistor radio nights of 1956, the soaring, angelic soprano of a 13-year-old boy from Harlem captured the innocent optimism of an era. Fronting the teenagers, Frankie Lymon became an overnight sensation with "Why Do Fools Fall in Love?", a gold-certified anthem that topped the charts and established him as the music industry's very first black teenage pop idol. With his charismatic showmanship, impeccable style, and flawless pitch, Lymon shattered racial barriers on national television, providing the foundational blueprint that would later inspire the Jackson 5 and New Edition. He was a child who carried the dreams of a generation on his fragile shoulders. But show business in the 1950s was a predatory machine, and for Frankie, the spotlight became an inescapable cage. Exploited by predatory managers who withheld his royalties and left unprotected in an adult world of vice, Lymon was introduced to heroin at the staggering age of 15. The tragedy deepened when nature ran its course. His signature boyish soprano broke into a mature baritone, and the fickle music industry immediately turned its back on him. Record sales evaporated, and by the early 1960s, Lymon was locked in a horrific downward spiral of arrest warrants, failed comeback attempts, and severe physical withdrawal. He entered a despondent obscurity, drafted into the army only to face a court-martial for chronic drug offenses. In February 1968, believing he finally had a chance to record new material, he traveled back to New York. Instead, on February 27th, Lymon was discovered lifeless on the cold floor of his grandmother's bathroom in Harlem, a discarded syringe resting beside his body. Dead from an accidental heroin overdose at just 25 years old, the boy who sang so sweetly of love became a casualty of early fame, discarded by the world the moment his childhood faded. Old Dirty Bastard, ODB. If the late 20th century hip-hop landscape had a true, unfiltered punk rock spirit, it belonged to Russell Tyrone Jones, whom the world knew as Old Dirty Bastard. As a founding pillar of the legendary Wu-Tang Clan, ODB injected an explosive, avant-garde unpredictability into modern music. His 1993 verse on Protect Ya Neck and his platinum-selling 1995 solo debut, Return to the 36 Chambers, introduced a style that was completely untamed, an erratic mixture of raspy singing, guttural rapping, and raw comedic genius. He was a larger-than-life anti-hero, a cultural disruptor who famously crashed the 1998 Grammy stage to declare that his music was for the children. Yet behind the brilliant theatricality and the erratic public persona lay a severe, untreated mental health crisis, fueled by a devastating addiction to crack cocaine, marijuana, and synthetic opiates. The line between performance art and genuine psychological decay blurred completely as the late 1990s descended into absolute chaos. Jones became a constant fixture in the criminal justice system, facing charges for drug possession, property damage, and weapons violations, which culminated in a 2-year prison sentence in 2001. The severe chemical dependency systematically eroded his cognitive faculties, transforming a brilliant lyricist into a deeply paranoid, isolated man. On November 13, 2004, just 2 days prior to his 36th birthday, the final curtain fell. While working on tracks at a Manhattan recording studio, Jones collapsed unexpectedly. The official forensic post-mortem examination revealed a lethal mixture of cocaine and the prescription painkiller tramadol in his bloodstream. His heart had simply given out under the immense pressure of his vices. ODB left behind a legacy of raw authenticity, a stark reminder of the devastating toll that remains when the laughter stops and the music fades into silence. Dinah Washington. For those who cherish the golden era of American music, Ruth Lee Jones, known globally as Dinah Washington, reigned absolute. They called her the Queen of the Blues, but that title was far too small for a vocalist who effortlessly conquered jazz, pop, R&B, and traditional gospel. Her phrasing was sharp, her diction impeccable, and her emotional delivery possessed an incisive edge that could make a listener weep or smile in the span of a single note. Her magnificent 1959 masterpiece, What a Difference a Day Makes, earned her a Grammy Award and crossed color lines during a deeply segregated era, cementing her as one of the most bankable and respected female artists of our youth. Yet beneath the glittering furs, the regal stage persona, and the fierce independence, lay a woman constantly battling a deeply rooted insecurity regarding her physical appearance and personal relationships. To combat the exhausting demands of non-stop touring, sudden weight fluctuations, and severe insomnia, Washington turned to a dangerous, escalating regimen of prescription pharmaceuticals. She became completely dependent on a toxic cycle of diet pills to maintain her figure, barbiturates to sleep, and amphetamines to perform. Those close to her witnessed severe, chemical-induced mood swings, but the predatory machinery of show business kept pushing her onto the stage. On December 14, 1963, the music stopped. At just 39 years old, Washington was found unresponsive in her Detroit home. The official medical inquiry concluded that she had suffered an accidental, lethal interaction of secobarbital and amobarbital, combined with alcohol. A brilliant, blazing star who broke barriers and defined sophisticated soul, silenced far too soon by the very medicine she trusted to keep her together. John Coltrane. If modern jazz ever possessed a spiritual mystic, a creator who treated his instrument not as a tool, but as an altar, it was John William Coltrane. His saxophone didn't just play melodies, it embarked on a furious, deeply religious quest for cosmic truth. From his groundbreaking work with Miles Davis to his solo masterpieces like Giant Steps in 1960 and the deeply profound A Love Supreme in 1965, Coltrane revolutionized the harmonic possibilities of Western music. He introduced the world to sheets of sound, improvisational lines so rapid, dense, and intricate that they felt like a torrential downpour of pure human emotion. Tragically, before Coltrane could touch the divine, he had to crawl through the depths of hell. In the early 1950s, while navigating the exhausting, volatile lifestyle of an emerging jazz musician, he fell into a severe, paralyzing heroin addiction. The chemical dependency quickly ravaged his professional reputation, leading to erratic performances, missed rehearsals, and a humiliating dismissal from Miles Davis's band in 1957. Strung out and staring into absolute ruin, Coltrane experienced a profound spiritual awakening. He locked himself inside a bedroom in his mother's house, enduring a brutal, solitary, cold turkey withdrawal. He emerged from that room completely reformed, dedicating every remaining breath to a higher spiritual power through his music. Though he remained clean for the rest of his life, the immense physical trauma inflicted by those early years of heavy drug abuse, combined with intense overwork, took a hidden, terminal toll. In July 1967, at Huntington Hospital, Coltrane succumbed to liver cancer at the young age of 40. He left this earth as a musical saint, proving that from the deepest valley of addiction, a human soul could rise to touch the very face of heaven. Fats Navarro. To look back at the origins of modern jazz is to encounter the tragic, brief meteor that was Theodore Fats Navarro. He was an absolute titan of the bebop trumpet, possessing a tone that was completely unique, as smooth as heavy velvet, yet delivered with a flawless, robust power that rivaled his legendary contemporary, Dizzy Gillespie. His legendary 1947 recordings with Tad Dameron, including Our Delight and The Chase, demonstrated an improvisational maturity that was decades ahead of its time. Navarro didn't just play through chord progressions, he composed beautiful, lyrical poems on the fly, turning the trumpet into an engine of breathtaking elegance. But the beautiful melodies could not mask a fragile physical vessel. Navarro suffered from a severe chronic case of tuberculosis, a painful respiratory disease that systematically drained his physical stamina and strength. In a desperate, tragic attempt to dull the agonizing physical pain in his chest and escape the crushing racial and financial anxieties of the era, Navarro turned to heroin. The narcotic gave him temporary relief, but it quickly became an inescapable cage. The lethal combination of advanced tuberculosis and a severe intravenous drug dependency rapidly deteriorated his body. He grew increasingly emaciated, missed crucial club dates, and found himself isolated from the very community that revered his genius. On July 7, 1950, Navarro passed away in a New York hospital. He was only 26 years old. He left behind a tragically small discography, but an immense architectural footprint, a devastating reminder of a brilliant voice silenced before he ever had the chance to fully blossom. Ray Charles. To understand the soul of American music, one must look at Ray Charles Robinson, a man who walked through complete physical darkness to illuminate the world with sound. Blind since the age of 7 and orphaned by 15, Ray did not just play music, he felt it as a living, breathing entity. In the 1950s, he orchestrated a cultural revolution by fusing the sacred fervor of gospel with the secular passion of the blues, single-handedly inventing what we now revere as soul music. His monumental 1962 album, Modern Sounds in Country and Western Music, shattered racial and stylistic barriers, proving that a black artist could redefine an entirely separate genre. He was the genius, an absolute force of nature. Yet behind the infectious smile, the swaying shoulders, and the brilliant piano arrangements lay a grueling, hidden battle that lasted nearly 2 decades. Ray turned to heroin in his early 20s, seeking an escape from the immense loneliness of the road and the perpetual darkness of his sightless world. The drug became a constant companion, but it also made him a target. In 1965, following a high-profile arrest at a Boston airport where federal agents discovered his stash, Ray faced a definitive crossroads: a long prison sentence or absolute surrender to rehabilitation. He chose life. Ray checked himself into a clinic, enduring a brutal psychiatric and physical detox to reclaim his freedom. Unlike many of his peers, Ray conquered his demons, embarking on a magnificent, drug-free second act that solidified his status as an international treasure. When he passed away from liver disease in 2004 at the age of 73, he left behind an immortal legacy of resilience, proving that even the most deeply rooted addiction could be overcome by a stubborn, beautiful will to survive. Bud Powell. To listen to Earl Rudolph Bud Powell at the piano is to witness a beautiful, terrifying thunderstorm. He was the undisputed architect of bebop piano, a visionary who completely liberated the instrument from its traditional rhythmic constraints. Bud didn't just accompany, he played the piano as if it were an alto saxophone, executing rapid-fire, complex harmonic lines with his right hand while destabilizing the rhythm with his left. His legendary compositions, such as Tempus Fugit and Bouncing with Bud, became the foundational texts for generations of modern pianists. He was a thinker of unparalleled depth, a man whose mind operated at a speed that left ordinary musicians breathless. Tragically, the fragile machinery of Bud's genius was permanently shattered by a single brutal act of violence. In 1945, while defending his friend Thelonious Monk from a racial altercation, Powell was severely beaten by police officers, suffering a massive, traumatic blow to his head. The physical injury triggered a severe, lifelong psychological fracture, resulting in intense paranoia, hallucinations, and frequent emotional withdrawals. To cope with the agonizing mental instability and the devastating side effects of early psychiatric treatments, including repeated electroshock therapy, Powell turned heavily to alcohol and sedatives. The chemical combination was catastrophic. His behavior became deeply erratic. On certain nights, he would conjure pure celestial magic at the keys, while on others, he would sit frozen in a catatonic state. He spent his remaining years drifting between psychiatric facilities and brief, heartbreaking European comebacks. When he passed away in a New York hospital in 1966 at just 41, his body was completely spent. His story remains a profoundly sorrowful monument to a brilliant mind broken by a cruel world, leaving us to wonder how many masterpieces died within his silent hands. Jimi Hendrix. For those of us who lived through the electric, turbulent landscape of the late 1960s, James Marshall Hendrix was not merely a guitarist, he was a cosmic event. He did not play the instrument, he bent it to his absolute will, using feedback, distortion, and sheer physical showmanship to create a sonic language that had never existed before. His historic performance at the Monterey Pop Festival in 1967, where he famously set his guitar on fire, and his raw, political deconstruction of the Star-Spangled Banner at Woodstock in 1969 defined the counterculture movement. Jimi was a visionary pioneer who turned sound into a vivid, multi-dimensional canvas of pure emotion. But the blazing meteor burned far too hot for its fragile earthly vessel. Swept up in the chaotic, drug-fueled vortex of rock stardom, Hendrix became heavily dependent on a dangerous cocktail of amphetamines to stay awake, alcohol to cope with the relentless pressure of management, and powerful barbiturates to find sleep. The line between the public myth and the private, exhausted young man blurred completely. In September 1970, while staying in London, the toxic lifestyle reached its tragic, inevitable conclusion. Overwhelmed by exhaustion and suffering from chronic insomnia, Jimi ingested a massive, lethal dose of Vesparax, a highly potent prescription sleeping pill, and washed it down with red wine. He never woke up. At just 27 years old, the greatest guitarist in human history passed away due to asphyxiation from his own vomit while intoxicated. He vanished into the ether in the blink of an eye, a devastating reminder that when a brilliant flame dances too close to the edge of absolute chaos, it can be extinguished far too soon. Elmo Hope. To look deep into the shadows of the mid-century modern jazz era is to discover Saint Elmo Sylvester Hope, a creator whose profound brilliance was eclipsed only by his tragic obscurity. Growing up in New York alongside his childhood friends Bud Powell and Thelonious Monk, Elmo developed a highly sophisticated, unorthodox approach to the piano. His compositions, featured on legendary albums like Hope Meets Foster and Informal Jazz, were characterized by complex, shifting rhythms and dark, hauntingly beautiful harmonies that defied conventional patterns. He was a musician's musician, a quiet thinker whose intricate work was deeply revered by titans like John Coltrane and Sonny Rollins. Yet, the very complexity that defined his art could not shield him from the destructive cultural wave that swept through his generation. Like many of his contemporary jazz pioneers in the 1940s and 50s, Elmo fell into a severe, crippling dependency on intravenous heroin. The chemical addiction systematically dismantled his professional life, leading to multiple narcotics arrests. The definitive blow occurred when the state of New York permanently revoked his cabaret card, legally banning him from performing in any establishment that served alcohol. This bureaucratic death sentence forced him to relocate to Los Angeles in 1957, with his wife Bertha chasing the promise of a fresh start. However, the warm sunshine could not dissolve the internal darkness. His addiction persisted, gigs became increasingly sparse, and his name faded from public consciousness. By the mid-1960s, his physical frame was completely broken by years of poverty and substance abuse. In May 1967, following a brief hospitalization for a severe case of pneumonia, Elmo passed away from heart failure at the age of 43. He left this world in near total silence, a poignant reminder of a visionary master who gave his life to the music, but was forgotten by the very world he enriched. Etta James. If ever a voice possessed the raw power to shake the foundations of the earth and heal a broken soul in the same breath, it belonged to James Etta Hawkins, whom we collectively revere as Etta James. She didn't merely interpret songs, she survived them. From her early R&B chart toppers to her iconic 1960 masterpiece, At Last, Etta possessed a ferocious, versatile instrument that effortlessly bridged the gaps between blues, soul, jazz, and rock and roll. Her delivery was unfiltered, guttural, and soaked in an unapologetic passion that commanded absolute reverence. She was a woman who sang with the fierce authority of someone who had looked straight into the abyss and refused to back down. But the emotional depth that defined her historic career was forged in a chaotic childhood, marked by paternal absence and early exploitation. To cope with the exhausting loneliness of stardom and the lingering trauma of her youth, Etta fell into a devastating 20-year battle with severe heroin and cocaine addiction. Her dependency led to a string of painful consequences: missed performances, deep financial ruin, and numerous forging and drug-related arrests that nearly cost her her freedom. Yet, while other stars of her generation succumbed to the darkness, Etta possessed a stubborn, resilient spirit. In the late 1980s, she checked herself into the Betty Ford Center, clawing her way out of a multi-decade spiral to reclaim her life and her microphone. She returned to the stage with a weathered, thunderous power, releasing critically acclaimed albums and publishing a brutally honest autobiography, Rage to Survive. When she finally passed away from leukemia in 2012 at the age of 73, she left behind a legacy not of victimhood, but of absolute triumph. A roaring testament that even the heaviest chains of addiction can be broken by an unyielding will to live. As the final notes fade into silence, we are left with the echoing remnants of these 17 immortal souls. Their tragic downfalls force us to confront a profound, uncomfortable question. Is deep generational suffering an inevitable price for such otherworldly musical genius? Or did the predatory machinery of fame simply abandon them when they needed saving the most? We want to hear your perspective on this painful piece of history. Please drop a comment below and share your thoughts with our community. If you cherish the preservation of these raw, authentic musical legacies, don't forget to hit the like button and share this video. Thank you for watching Remembered Lives channel, where our icons are never forgotten and their stories live on forever.